There is a certain sound that should never echo across a peaceful ranch at sunrise. The crack of a gunshot. I heard it before I even opened my eyes. A sharp, ugly tear in the fabric of a morning quiet. And in that half-second of waking confusion, 1,000 possibilities crashed through my mind. Was someone poaching? Was one of my neighbors in trouble? Was my prize bull Titan in danger? I sprang out of bed, still tangled in my sheets, and sprinted to the window, my heart punching my ribs so hard I thought it might break free. What I saw out there on my land made me curse loud enough to wake the dead. A group of men, strangers in camo gear, rifles slung over their shoulders, marching straight across my fields like they owned the place. My fields! Land my grandfather bought, land my father worked, land I poured my blood, sweat, and soul into. Land that some folks in this county still couldn't quite accept belonged to a black family, 3 generations deep. 2 days earlier, if you had asked me to name the one person who could stir up trouble faster than a twister through a chicken coop, I would have said it without thinking. Karen Carter. Karen was the self-appointed queen of the local HOA. A woman who treated neighborhood bylaws like her personal Bible and acted like she had been ordained by some higher power. Specifically, the power vested in wealthy, white homeowners, to enforce them. The problem was, my ranch didn't fall under the HOA's jurisdiction. Never had, never would. The property lines were clear as day on every county map. That never stopped Karen, though. From the moment her gated community went up on the hill overlooking my western pasture, she'd made her displeasure known. She called my ranch an eyesore, a term that always felt loaded when it came her lips, her eyes flicking over my weathered barns and then lingering on me, the black man running the place. She called my animals a health hazard. She complained about the smell, the noise, the look of the barns, even the way the grass grew. To hear her talk, you'd think I was running a toxic waste dump instead of a working family ranch that consistently passed every agricultural inspection with flying colors. It wasn't the ranch she hated. It was the ranch owner. It was the fact that my heritage, my livelihood, existed right next to her sanitized suburban dream. A visible contradiction to the homogeneous picture she wanted for her little kingdom. Titan was my pride, a massive, glossy black Angus bull with the temperament of a wise old king. He wasn't just livestock. He was lineage, legacy. He had won ribbons and trophies all across the county fairs and livestock shows, a testament to generations of careful breeding. More than that, Titan was family. Every morning, he'd come to the fence when he saw me, snorting softly, waiting for his head rub and a scratch behind the ears. It was our ritual, our quiet understanding. I had raised him from a calf, bottle-fed him when his mama couldn't, and there was nothing in the world that could replace him. He represented the best of what my family had built here. The day before the gunshots, I had noticed something strange. Tire tracks, deep and aggressive, across the muddy field near the south fence. They weren't mine, weren't my farmhands, and weren't from any neighbor I recognized. I asked Joe, my next-door neighbor and one of the few white folks around who treated me like just another farmer, not a curiosity or a problem, if he'd seen anything odd. Joe, bless his straightforward heart, just chuckled grimly. Heard Karen bragging in the HOA meeting, he'd said, leaning on the fence post between our properties. Something about finding a way to clean up the ranch problem once and for all. Said it was lowering the tone of the area. I had brushed it off at the time. Karen made empty threats all the time. Mostly veiled complaints dropped at town meetings or passive-aggressive notes left unsigned. Now, standing there in my boxers at the window, watching camo-clad strangers tramping across my land like conquerors, I knew I should have taken Joe more seriously. Her words, "clean up the ranch problem," echoed in my head with a chilling new meaning. I yanked on a pair of jeans and boots so fast I nearly fell down the stairs. I grabbed my phone and my old 12-gauge shotgun. Not because I wanted a fight, but because a man has a right, a duty, to defend his property, especially when the lines between carelessness and outright malice felt dangerously blurred. I tore out the door, yelling the whole way, "Hey, you're trespassing!" I shouted as I ran, my boots thudding against the damp earth. The sound carried clearly in the still morning air. The men looked up casually, no fear, no guilt, like they belonged there. One of them, the tallest, even grinned and tipped his camo cap. His eyes, hidden behind mirrored sunglasses, scanned me up and down with an unnerving lack of concern. "Relax, buddy," he said, his voice laced with condescending ease. "We got permission." Permission? My blood boiled hotter than a branding iron. The casual arrogance, the assumption of right. It felt sickeningly familiar. Permission? From who? I barked, stopping a safe distance away, but making sure my shotgun was visible, held loosely but ready. The man shrugged, gesturing vaguely back towards the direction of the HOA community. The HOA lady, Karen, I think, said we could hunt hogs on this patch. Said the owner was, absentee, wasn't keeping it up. Said it was basically abandoned land, and we'd be doing the neighborhood a favor thinning out pests. Abandoned? Absentee? Doing a favor? I thought I was going to blow a gasket. First off, Karen had zero authority. Second, even if she had, nobody had the right to authorize strangers with guns to roam my land. Hunting non-existent pests based on lies likely steeped in her racist assumptions about how a black man would manage property. She couldn't fathom I cared, that I was present, that this land mattered to me and my family's history. I pointed forcefully towards the fence line, towards a clearly visible, "No trespassing" sign in big red letters nailed to a sturdy post. "You see that wire? That fence? That sign? That's your first clue you're not supposed to be here. This isn't abandoned, and I sure as hell ain't absentee." One of them, a heavier-set guy with a scraggly beard, looked genuinely sheepish, glancing between me and the sign. Another, younger one, looked bored, but the tall one, the leader, just adjusted his sunglasses, his expression unreadable but radiating smug indifference. Then he casually turned, his rifle coming up slightly, and that's when I saw him. Titan, standing at the edge of the far field, near the oak line, head high, his glossy coat gleaming in the morning sun. Curious, as always, about the strangers. Drawn by the commotion. "No!" I screamed, the word tearing from my throat raw with panic. But it was too late. The tall guy squeezed the trigger. The sharp crack echoed across the field, mocking the sunrise. Titan staggered back, a grotesque, unnatural movement for such a powerful creature. His massive body swayed like a falling tree. I dropped my shotgun without thinking and ran faster than I had ever moved in my life, the world narrowing to that horrible scene, the pounding in my chest drowning out everything else. Mud splattered my jeans, my lungs burned. But I didn't slow. When I reached him, Titan was on his side, great shuddering gasps escaping his muzzle, blood pooling dark and thick in the grass beneath his massive frame. I dropped to my knees in the mud beside him, tears blurring my vision, mixing with the dirt and blood on my face. "You stupid sons of..." I choked, unable to even finish the sentence, the rage and heartbreak a physical blockage in my throat. My hands pressed against the wound, a futile gesture against the sheer damage. The bullet had gone in high on his shoulder, a messy, devastating impact. One of the hunters, the sheepish one, mumbled something incoherent about a clean kill being legal during hunting season. I turned on him so fast he stumbled backward, tripping over his own feet. "There is no hunting season for prize bulls on private land, you idiot!" I roared, my voice shaking with a fury I barely recognized. "This isn't some public hunting ground Karen can just sign away because she doesn't like the look of my place. This is my bull, my Titan. You just shot him on my property." I was shaking uncontrollably, with rage, with heartbreak, with the sickening realization of how close I'd come to losing everything because of one woman's prejudiced vendetta. Every second felt like a lifetime. Titan groaned again, a low, rumbling sound of agony that ripped through me. I yanked my phone from my pocket, my fingers clumsy and wet with Titan's blood. First call, Doc Harris, the vet. My voice cracked as I explained, urging him to hurry. Second call, the sheriff. Trespassers shot my bull. Need officers now. Southfield, hurry. The words tumbled out, barely coherent. The hunters started looking genuinely nervous now. The fat one muttered about leaving, his eyes darting towards the road. The tall one stood his ground for another moment, still trying to project authority. But even he had to know the situation was spiraling disastrously out of control. I didn't care if they ran or stayed right then. They weren't going to get away with this. Not after what they had done. Not after what she had done. Just as the first faint wail of sirens cut through the morning air, Karen herself drove up in her gleaming white SUV, pulling onto the dirt track near the gate with audacious confidence. She stepped out, sunglasses perched perfectly on her nose, holding a clipboard like she was conducting an official inspection. She looked smug, victorious, utterly oblivious, or perhaps entirely complicit, in the devastation unfolding just yards away. I wanted to throttle her. I wanted to scream, until my voice gave out. "What is all this noise about?" she said loudly, her voice dripping with fake concern as she surveyed the scene. The hunters looking panicked, me kneeling in the mud beside my dying bull, the distant sirens growing louder. Her eyes barely flickered towards Titan. I rose slowly, my legs stiff, my hands stained red. I looked her straight in the eye, letting her see the cold fury that had replaced the tears. "You did this," I said, my voice low, deadly calm. The calmness scared me almost as much as the rage. "This is on you, Karen." Her smugness faltered for just a fraction of a second before the mask snapped back into place. "I have no idea what you're talking about. I simply authorized some responsible sportsman to help with pest control in the area. If your animal wandered, he didn't wander." I cut her off, my voice rising despite myself. "He was shot. On my land. By men you sent here under false pretenses because you can't stand the sight of me or my ranch." Titan moaned low in pain behind me, a gut-wrenching sound. I turned back to him, pressing my hand gently against his massive head, whispering a promise into his ear, ignoring Karen, ignoring the approaching sirens for just one more second. "Hang on, buddy. Just hang on. We're going to make this right." And deep down, beneath the grief and the fury, a cold, hard resolve settled in my gut. Whatever it took, whatever the cost, I was going to dismantle Karen Carter's little empire of prejudice so thoroughly that she would regret ever thinking she could treat my home, my heritage, and my life as disposable. The sirens grew louder, a shrill promise that backup was on its way. This fight was just beginning. The next few hours were a blur of flashing lights, tense conversations, and the agonizing wait as Doc Harris worked over Titan. Deputy Miller arrived first, young but sharp, quickly assessing the gravity of the situation. He separated the hunters, took initial statements, his face grim as he looked from the bleeding bull to the no trespassing sign, then to Karen, who was still trying to spin her narrative of neighborhood improvement and unfortunate accidents. "Ma'am," Miller said, cutting through her excuses, "did you specifically tell these men they had permission to hunt on this specific property?" I indicated the general underdeveloped area needed attention. Karen prevaricated, waving vaguely. These gentlemen volunteered their expertise. The tall hunter, now looking significantly less cool without his rifle, which Miller had secured, chimed in defensively. She gave us a map. "Pointed right here," said the owner wouldn't mind. He pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket, a poorly photocopied map with my fields crudely circled and a scribbled note at the bottom. pest abatement authorized per HOA Community Standards Initiative. It wasn't even an attempt at a convincing forgery. Sheriff Danvers arrived shortly after, an old-school lawman who knew my family, knew the ranch's history, and had zero tolerance for entitled nonsense, regardless of who was perpetrating it. He took one look at the map, at Karen's defensive posture, at me standing stiffly beside my wounded bull, and his face set into hard lines. "Karen," Danvers said, his voice dangerously quiet, "this property ain't, nor has it ever been, under HOA jurisdiction. You know that. I know that. So why don't you tell me exactly what authority you thought you had sending armed men onto Mr. Washington's private land?" He used my name deliberately, firmly establishing my ownership and rights in front of everyone. Karen paled, sputtering about bylaws and community perception, but Danvers wasn't having it. He'd dealt with her type before. People who weaponized rules and regulations to enforce their own prejudices. He saw right through her carefully constructed facade of civic duty to the ugly bias underneath. Meanwhile, Doc Harris and his assistant managed to stabilize Titan enough for transport. "He's strong, John," Doc said, clapping a hand on my shoulder, his gaze meeting mine with grim understanding. "But it's bad, real bad. We'll do everything we can at the clinic." Watching them carefully load Titan onto the trailer, his massive form unnaturally still, felt like watching a part of my own history being carted away, broken and bleeding. With Titan safely on his way, I turned my full attention back to the scene. The hunters were cited for armed trespassing, unlawful discharge of a firearm, and reckless endangerment. Their hunting licenses were suspended pending investigation, their rifles confiscated. They looked miserable, finally understanding the depth of the trouble Karen's lies and their own carelessness had landed them in. But my focus was Karen. Sheriff Danvers wasn't letting her off the hook. Forgery of documents, he listed calmly, holding up the pathetic permit. Inciting criminal trespass. Conspiracy. And given the potential value of that bull, and the circumstances, potentially felony destruction of property or animal cruelty charges, depending on what the DA decides. He looked directly at Karen. "You deliberately misled these men and sent them onto private property, knowing you had no authority, likely resulting in severe injury to valuable livestock. Is that about the size of it?" Karen started to bluster, threatening lawyers, calling it a misunderstanding, even trying to imply I was somehow negligent. That was her go-to tactic: deflect, deny, and paint the victim, especially the black victim, as the problem. Danvers just shook his head slowly. "Karen, I think you need to come down to the station." He nodded to Deputy Miller, who stepped forward, handcuffs ready. The sight of Karen Carter, the untouchable HOA queen, being read her rights and placed in the back of a squad car, her face a mask of disbelief and fury, sent a ripple through the neighbors who had gathered at a distance, drawn by the sirens and commotion. It was a small victory, but a potent one. The power dynamic, so skewed by her privilege and prejudice, had finally, publicly tilted. As the police cars pulled away, taking Karen and the hunter's statements, I stood alone in the field, the muddy ground scarred by tire tracks and blood. The morning air still smelled faintly of gunpowder and fear. The relief was quickly overshadowed by the gnawing worry for Titan and the cold certainty that this legal battle was far from over. Karen had money, connections, and a deep-seated belief in her own righteousness, fueled by a prejudice that saw my success and my heritage as an affront. I walked back towards the house, my boots heavy, my heart heavier. "I called Joe. She's been arrested," I told him. "But it's just the start." "Figured as much," Joe replied. "Anything you need, John, you call. A lot of folks are tired of her crap, especially now they see what she's capable of." He was right. This wasn't just my fight anymore. Karen, in her arrogance and racism, had finally crossed a line visible to everyone. She hadn't just attacked my bull. She had attacked the basic decency and respect that should hold a community together. And I would use every tool I had, the law, the truth, and the growing support of my neighbors, to ensure she paid for it. The fight for Titan's life was in Doc Harris's hands now. The fight for justice, and against the racism that caused this, was in mine. The following weeks were a grueling campaign fought on multiple fronts. First, Titan. I spent hours at the vet clinic, sitting quietly by his stall, talking to him, bringing him his favorite molasses treats. Doc Harris was cautiously optimistic. The bullet hadn't hit major organs, but infection was a serious risk, and the recovery would be long. Seeing Titan slowly regain strength, first lifting his head, then struggling to stand, then finally taking tentative steps, fueled my resolve like nothing else. He was a fighter, embodying the resilience of my family on this land. Second, the legal battle. Karen, predictably, lawyered up immediately, posting bail and launching a counteroffensive. Her narrative, spread through sympathetic whispers in her social circles and veiled statements from her lawyer, painted her as a well-intentioned community leader victimized by an aggressive rancher and an unfortunate incident involving a potentially dangerous animal. The racial coding was barely concealed. The unpredictable black man, the uncivilized ranch encroaching on their refined neighborhood. But I had truth on my side and evidence. Joe readily agreed to give a sworn statement about Karen's comments at the HOA meeting, explicitly mentioning her desire to deal with the Washington place because it didn't fit the community aesthetic. Then came the trail cams, hidden strategically around the property line. One camera had perfectly captured Karen meeting the hunters near the south fence 2 days before the shooting. The grainy footage showed her handing over the map, pointing emphatically towards my fields, laughing as she spoke. While the audio was faint, lip-reading experts confirmed she used phrases like, "Don't worry about him," and "eyesore needs cleaning up." Armed with this, Sheriff Danvers and the district attorney felt they had a strong criminal case. Forgery, conspiracy to commit trespass, and felony animal cruelty charges were filed. My own civil suit followed, meticulously prepared by a sharp lawyer who specialized in property rights and wasn't intimidated by Karen's wealth or connections. We sued for veterinary costs, already astronomical. Titan's lost stud fees and show potential, substantial. Punitive damages for malicious intent and emotional distress. We made sure the lawsuit explicitly mentioned Karen's history of targeted harassment and implied racial animus as motivating factors. The turning point came at an emergency HOA meeting Karen called, attempting to rally support and control the narrative. Joe and I, along with a surprising number of other neighbors, some from her own gated community, attended. Karen delivered a tearful, self-pitying speech about misunderstandings and her tireless efforts for the neighborhood. When she finished, I stood up calmly. "Mrs. Carter," I said, my voice carrying clearly in the suddenly silent room. "You talk about community standards. Does that standard include lying, forging documents, and sending armed men onto your neighbor's private property, resulting in the near-fatal shooting of a valuable animal, simply because you don't approve of who lives there or how they live?" Before she could respond, I addressed the room. For anyone interested in the facts, not Mrs. Carter's fiction, I have security footage of her meeting with the hunters and giving them instructions. I'm happy to share it with the sheriff, the DA, and any resident who values truth over prejudice. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Whispers turned into open murmurs of disbelief and anger directed at Karen. Her face crumpled, not in sadness, but in the fury of being exposed. She tried to shout me down, but people were already turning away from her, shaking their heads. Her reign, built on intimidation and snobbery, was collapsing in real time. The legal process dragged on, but the outcome felt increasingly inevitable. Karen's attempts to delay and obfuscate were shot down by a no-nonsense judge. Her high-priced lawyer couldn't spin the video evidence or Joe's damning testimony. Facing undeniable proof and dwindling community support, Karen finally accepted a plea deal just before the trial. She pleaded guilty to reduced charges, misdemeanor counts of trespass, conspiracy, and animal cruelty, plus the forgery charge. The sentence, however, was designed for maximum impact. Hefty fines covering all my vet bills and damages, 5 years probation, a permanent ban from holding any HOA office anywhere, a strict restraining order keeping her 500 yards away from my property and family, and 300 hours of mandatory community service. Mucking out stalls at the county animal shelter. The poetic justice was not lost on anyone. The day the sentence was handed down, Titan was back in his pasture, still thinner, bearing a scar, but alive and strong. He walked with a slight limp, but Doc Harris said he'd likely make a near-full recovery, though his champion show days were probably over. That didn't matter. He was home. He was safe. Karen sold her house within months, moving out of state under a cloud of disgrace. The HOA elected new leadership, people who actually seemed interested in building bridges rather than walls. The air in the neighborhood felt lighter, cleaner. Standing by the fence that evening, watching Titan graze peacefully as the sun set over the hills, I felt a profound sense of peace mixed with weary satisfaction. It wasn't just about winning a legal case. It was about defending my home, my heritage, and my right to exist without apology against prejudice masked as propriety. Karen had tried to erase me, to clean up the part of the community she didn't like. Instead, she had exposed her own ugliness, and, in doing so, inadvertently strengthened the bonds of decency among those who stood against her. The ranch endured. My family's legacy endured. Titan endured. And in the quiet strength of that endurance, we had truly won.